Something just shifted inside the Cleveland Browns organization. And when the man who holds the keys to this entire franchise decides he has heard enough, when Andrew Berry, one of the most composed and carefully spoken executives in the NFL, steps forward and pushes back against the noise, you stop. You pay attention, because that does not happen without a reason. That does not happen unless the pressure inside that building has reached a level that can no longer be managed with silence. The media has been circling, the tensions have been rising, and now the man at the top of the Browns football operation has had enough. What is really going on inside Cleveland, and why is Andrew Berry hitting back right now? Andrew Berry is not the kind of man who makes headlines by accident. In a league full of executives who perform for cameras, who play the media game with obvious relish, who understand that visibility is its own form of power, Berry has always been something different. He is measured. He is precise. He chooses his words the way a surgeon chooses an instrument, carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of what each one is designed to do. He does not speak in heat. He does not react in the moment. He processes, he considers, and then he speaks. And that is exactly what makes the moment we are now living through so significant. Because when a man like Andrew Berry decides to hit back at the media noise surrounding his organization, it means the noise has gotten loud enough that silence is no longer a viable strategy. It means something is happening inside the Cleveland Browns that demands a response. To understand where we are right now, you have to understand where Andrew Berry came from and what he was brought to Cleveland to do. Berry joined the Browns organization as Vice President of Player Personnel in 2016, left to join the Philadelphia Eagles, and then came back to Cleveland in 2020 as the General Manager and Executive Vice President of Football Operations, becoming at 32 years old one of the youngest general managers in NFL history and one of the few black general managers in the league at that time. His hiring was a statement. It was the Browns declaring that they were going to do things differently, that they were going to build through data, through analytics, through a modern approach to roster construction that would eventually put this franchise in a position to compete at the highest level. Berry brought credibility. He brought intelligence. He brought a quiet confidence that the Cleveland Browns organization had not always been known for projecting. And in the years that followed his arrival, there were real signs of progress. The roster improved. The draft selections showed a level of thought and intentionality that had been missing for years. Free agency was managed with discipline. The team won games. And then Deshaun Watson happened. The trade, the contract, the guaranteed money, the suspension, the years of waiting and hoping and watching a franchise quarterback who is supposed to change everything become the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. And Berry, who was part of the decision-making apparatus that brought Watson to Cleveland, found himself in the position that all executives find themselves in when a blockbuster move goes sideways, defending decisions that were made in good faith but had produced painful outcomes. The media scrutiny that followed the Watson situation never fully went away. It settled into the background, a persistent hum of criticism and second-guessing that shaped how everything the Browns did was covered and interpreted. Every draft pick, every free agent signing, every coaching decision was filtered through the lens of what had happened with Watson. The question hanging over the organization, unspoken in polite company but loud everywhere else, was whether Andrew Berry had the confidence of ownership, whether his job was secure, whether the Browns were going to make another dramatic change at the top of their football operation, or whether they were going to stay the course and trust that the foundation being built would eventually produce the results everyone was waiting for. Into this environment came the 2025 offseason, new quarterback decisions, new roster moves, new opportunities for the media to form opinions, stake out positions, and generate the kind of content that gets clicks and drives engagement in the modern sports media landscape. And the coverage of the Cleveland Browns in the weeks and months leading up to Berry's decision to push back was not gentle. It was pointed. It was, in some corners, relentless.
Reports about tensions within the organization, questions about the direction of the team, speculation about the relationship between the front office and the coaching staff, narratives about a franchise that was once again failing to get out of its own way, once again finding new and creative ways to turn promise into disappointment. Some of this coverage was grounded in real reporting. Some of it was the inevitable result of a media ecosystem that needs stories, that rewards drama over nuance, that has learned from years of experience that Cleveland Browns dysfunction content performs extraordinarily well with audiences. There is an entire genre of sports media content that is essentially built around the proposition that the Browns will find a way to mess things up, and that genre exists because historically it has been proven right enough times to remain credible. The problem is that when you are inside an organization trying to build something, when you are making decisions you believe in and working towards goals you genuinely feel are achievable, that constant drumbeat of negativity and skepticism is not just background noise. It gets inside things. It affects how your players are perceived. It shapes the narratives that surround your draft picks and your roster moves. It becomes part of the story whether you want it to or not.
Andrew Berry had been navigating this reality for years. He had done so with remarkable composure, with the kind of professional discipline that comes from genuinely believing in the work you are doing and being secure enough in that belief that you do not need to engage with every critic or respond to every report. But the tensions that were rising inside the Browns organization in this particular moment, the quarterback debate, the questions about roster direction, the speculation about the front office and coaching staff dynamic, had reached a temperature that was affecting things in real and measurable ways. The coverage was not just background noise anymore. It was shaping the public perception of the franchise at a critical moment. It was threatening to define the narrative before the season even began. And Andrew Berry decided that enough was enough. His response, public, deliberate, and notably sharper in tone than his usual carefully crafted communications, was not a meltdown. It was not an emotional outburst. It was something more calculated than that, and in some ways more interesting. It was a man who had thought carefully about what he wanted to say, who had decided that the moment required him to say it clearly, and who had chosen to push back against specific narratives and specific characterizations that he felt were inaccurate and damaging. He addressed the media noise directly. He pushed back against the characterization of internal tensions as something dysfunctional or alarming. He defended his front office's decision-making process, and he did it in a way that made clear he had no interest in being passive about the story being told about his organization. The reaction to Berry's pushback was immediate and, predictably, divided. There were people in the media who respected the directness, who felt that a general manager being willing to engage substantively with criticism was actually a sign of confidence and accountability rather than defensiveness. These voices argued that the alternative, staying silent while damaging narratives took root, was worse, that Berry was right to address the situation head-on, and that his willingness to do so reflected a leader who was in control of the situation and not rattled by it. This reading of the moment portrayed Berry as someone who was not hiding, not running, not hoping the stories would go away on their own. He was facing them. He was refuting them where he felt refutation was warranted, and he was making clear that the Cleveland Browns were not going to be defined by the worst possible interpretation of every development inside their building. But there were also voices, and these were not quiet voices, who read Berry's response very differently. To them, the fact that the general manager of the Cleveland Browns felt compelled to publicly address the media narrative surrounding his franchise was itself a story. Not because his pushback was wrong, but because it was happening at all. In the NFL, organizations that are operating with full internal cohesion, that have genuine buy-in at every level, that have a clear direction and a unified sense of purpose, those organizations typically do not need their general managers to take time out of the off-season to tell the media that things are fine. The need to say it, these voices argued, was itself evidence that things were not entirely fine, that the tensions being reported were real enough to demand a response, that somewhere underneath the polished language and the measured tone was an organization that was dealing with real friction, real disagreement, real challenges that had not yet been fully resolved. The truth, as it almost always is in these situations, was probably somewhere between these two readings. NFL organizations are complex environments. They are collections of ambitious, competitive people, players, coaches, scouts, executives, who all have strong opinions about how to win football games and who do not always agree with each other. The presence of tension in a football organization is not automatically a sign of dysfunction. In fact, some of the most successful franchises in NFL history have been characterized by internal debates and disagreements that produced better outcomes because the people involved were willing to challenge each other. The question is never whether tension exists, it always does, but whether it is being managed productively or whether it is festering into something that undermines the team's ability to function. What the coverage of the Browns had been suggesting and what Berry was pushing back against was the latter interpretation. The media narrative had begun to paint a picture of an organization that was not just managing normal internal tensions, but was genuinely struggling with deeper problems. Questions about the communication between Berry and the coaching staff, questions about whether everyone in the building was on the same page about the quarterback situation and the direction of the team. Questions about whether ownership had the patience to see this particular vision through, or whether another round of change was coming sooner than anyone was officially acknowledging. These are not frivolous questions in the context of the Cleveland Browns. This is a franchise that has made sweeping changes at the front office and coaching level multiple times in recent memory. A franchise that has been through more general managers and more head coaches than almost any other team in the league over the past 2 decades. The institutional instability that has defined Cleveland's football operation for so long is not ancient history. It is living memory for players, coaches, and fans alike. And so when reports begin to emerge about rising tensions, about questions being asked at the ownership level, about the possibility of changes, even when those reports are speculative or incomplete, they land with a weight in Cleveland that they would not in a more stable franchise environment. Berry understood this. He understood that in Cleveland, a rumor of instability carries more weight than it would in New England or Kansas City or San Francisco, precisely because Cleveland's history gives those rumors credibility they would not otherwise have. He understood that allowing the narrative to solidify, allowing the media to tell a story of dysfunction and confusion without any pushback, was not a neutral act. It was ceding the ground. It was allowing someone else to define his organization at a moment when the organization's identity was still being formed in the public consciousness. And Berry, for all his composure and all his patience, was not willing to do that.
His pushback was also, in a subtle but important way, a message to the people inside the building. Players and coaches consume media coverage of their organizations. They read the reports, they hear the radio shows, they see the social media posts. When a general manager stands up in front of the cameras and says clearly, directly, without hedging, that the narrative being constructed around this franchise does not reflect the reality of what is happening inside it, that is not just a message to the media. It is a message to everyone in the locker room who has been hearing those stories and wondering what to believe. It is a signal from the person at the top of the football operation that there is confidence, that there is direction, that the noise outside the building should not be allowed to affect what happens inside it. Whether that message landed, whether it achieved what Berry intended it to achieve, is something that will be answered not by what happens in press conferences, but by what happens on the field. The NFL is ultimately a results business. The conversations, the narratives, the media debates, all of it becomes secondary the moment the games start and the scoreboard begins to tell its own story. But the weeks and months before those games begin are not meaningless. The culture that is built in that period, the sense of purpose and direction that either takes root or does not, the belief that either develops in a locker room or gets eaten away by doubt and distraction, all of it matters.
all of it shapes what happens when the lights come on and the competition begins. Andrew Berry hitting back at the media noise is a moment in the larger story of the Cleveland Browns. Not the final chapter, not even a turning point necessarily, but a moment that reveals something about the man and about the organization he is leading. It reveals a general manager who is not willing to be passive about the story being told about his work. It reveals a franchise that is aware of its own history and is trying, in its way, to write something different. And it reveals that beneath the measured language and the professional composure, there is genuine investment, genuine care about what this team is building and how it is perceived, that goes beyond the calculated management of public relations. The tensions are real. The questions are legitimate. The scrutiny that comes with being the Cleveland Browns, with carrying all of that history into every season, with knowing that every stumble will be magnified and every setback will be met with the darkest possible interpretation, is not going away. But neither is Andrew Berry, and his decision to push back, to engage, to refuse to let the narrative run away from him, that is a decision that says something. About his confidence, about his conviction, about his belief that this time, in Cleveland, the story is going to end differently. The media noise will continue, it always does, but now it knows that someone inside that building is listening, and that someone is not afraid to respond.